It's been exactly 43 days since Mateo died at Big Nose Kate's saloon. I know because I've marked each one on the calendar hanging in the back office, red X's like tiny wounds across the paper. The tourists who flock to Tombstone don't know about him. They come for the gunfight reenactments, the Boot Hill Cemetery, and the chance to drink where legends once drank. They don't notice the dark stain beneath the corner bar stool, the one we couldn't quite scrub out no matter how much bleach we used. I wasn't supposed to be working that night. My shift had ended at 8, but Delia called in sick, so I stayed on. If I'd gone home like I planned, maybe I wouldn't be in this mess. Maybe I'd still be blissfully ignorant of what happens at Kate's after midnight. I moved to Tombstone 6 months ago from Phoenix, running from a failed marriage and mounting debt. The divorce wasn't pretty. Michelle got the house, the car, and most of our friends. I got freedom and an empty bank account. My cousin Ray mentioned they needed bartenders at this historic saloon in Tombstone, and I figured a small town might be the reset I needed. Tombstone sits in Cochise County, about 70 miles southeast of Tucson. It's basically a living museum, wooden boardwalks, restored 1880s buildings, and enough Wild West folklore to fill a dozen Netflix documentaries. During the day, the town bustles with tourists. At night, especially during the off-season, it gets eerily quiet, like the whole place is holding its breath. Big Nose Kate's is named after Doc Holliday's girlfriend, and it leans hard into its heritage. Swinging saloon doors, mounted longhorns on the walls, vintage whiskey ads, and staff dressed in period-appropriate clothing. I draw the line at the full costume. I wear the mandatory vest and bow tie over my regular clothes. Management doesn't push it because I make damn good cocktails and can handle the weekend rushes. Mateo had worked at Kate's for nearly 15 years. Quiet guy, kept to himself, but knew every regular by name and drink preference. That night, just after midnight, he was restocking the bourbon behind the bar when he suddenly froze, staring at something near the entrance. Then he started screaming, not in fear, but in a language I'd never heard him speak before. His body went rigid, back arching at an angle that couldn't be natural. Then blood, so much blood, pouring from his eyes, ears, mouth. The doctors called it a brain aneurysm, but they didn't see what I saw. The next day, Lorna, the owner, called me into her office. She's a tough woman in her 60s, with silver hair always pulled into a tight bun. Her hands shook as she slid a yellowed envelope across her desk. "You're taking Mateo's shift now," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Read these. Memorize them. Your life depends on it." Inside was a handwritten list titled "Rules for the Night Watch at Big Nose Kate's." I laughed, thinking it was some elaborate hazing for the new guy. I'm not laughing anymore. I've survived 43 nights now, and I'm writing this down because I don't know how many more I have left. If you ever find yourself working the late shift at Big Nose Kate's saloon in Tombstone, these rules might save your life. They saved mine. So far. The list contains 7 rules, written in a cramped, shaky hand that I later learned was Mateo's. I keep it folded in my vest pocket now, paper worn thin from countless unfoldings. Rule 1. Always leave a shot of Reposado tequila on the bar at midnight. Don't watch who takes it. Rule 2. If a woman in a red dress enters after 1 a.m., serve her only water. No matter what she orders, give her water. Don't let her touch you. Rule 3. The bathroom door at the end of the hall will sometimes lead somewhere else. If you hear crying from inside, lock it and put a out of order sign up until morning. Rule 4. If the jukebox plays Ghost Riders in the Sky, without anyone selecting it, close the bar immediately. Get everyone out. Stay inside. Rule 5. The old man who sits at the corner table isn't human. Serve him. Be polite, but never look at his hands. Rule 6. If you smell burning sage, go to the storeroom and stay there until the smell is gone. Don't investigate. Rule 7. Never ever turn off all the lights. Even during closing, leave the bar lamp on until sunrise. After reading them 3 times, I went straight to Lorna. She was tallying receipts in the small back office decorated with faded photos of Tombstone's glory days. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, slapping the paper down. Her eyes flicked to the list, then back to her ledger. "Did I sound like I was joking, Dan? You expect me to believe there's some, supernatural shit happening here?" She sighed, removing her reading glasses. "You saw what happened to Mateo. Was that normal to you?" Cold fingers traced my spine as I recalled the way his body had contorted. The doctors said, "I don't care what they said." Mateo knew the rules. He followed them for 15 years. That night he broke one. "Which one? Does it matter?" She rubbed her temples. "Look, I don't expect you to believe everything right away. Just follow them. This place has history, not the sanitized version we sell to tourists." I needed the job, so I nodded and left her office, tucking the list back in my pocket. That night was my first late shift alone. At 11:50, I set out the tequila shot as Rule 1 directed. I felt ridiculous, but the memory of Mateo's screams was still vivid. I busied myself wiping down tables, deliberately not watching the bar. When I turned back at 12:05, the shot glass was empty. I told myself someone must have taken it. We still had a few stragglers finishing drinks in the corner booth. A bachelorette party from Tucson, their matching pink cowboy hats now askew after hours of drinking. "Last call, ladies," I announced. As they gathered their belongings, giggling and fishing for credit cards, a blast of cold air swept through the saloon. The temperature in Arizona drops dramatically at night, but this felt different. Purposeful, like someone had opened a freezer door. The jukebox in the corner flickered to life. I hadn't even realized it was plugged in. We usually use the modern sound system for music. My skin prickled as the first haunting notes of a song began. A gravelly voice sang about riders in the sky. Rule 4. If the jukebox plays Ghost Riders in the Sky without anyone selecting it, close the bar immediately. Get everyone out. Stay inside. "We're closing now," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Sorry, technical issue with the lights." "But we just ordered," one woman began. "On the house, but you need to leave. Now." Something in my tone must have convinced them. They hurried out the door, casting confused glances back at me. I locked the heavy wooden door behind them, my hands trembling. The song continued playing, filling the empty saloon with its eerie tale of ghost riders chasing cattle across the sky. I remembered why it had sounded familiar, Johnny Cash's version. My dad used to play it on road trips. As the last notes faded, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. The air felt heavy with anticipation. A scraping sound came from the corner table, the one Lorna had designated as where Doc Holliday used to play cards for tourists. The chair moved on its own, sliding back as if making room for someone to sit. The reasonable part of my brain suggested a draft, uneven floorboards, maybe even a minor tremor. They happen occasionally in southern Arizona. But as I watched, indentations appeared on the worn leather seat, as if invisible weight was pressing down on it. I desperately wanted to run, but Rule 4 was clear. Stay inside. For 3 excruciating hours, I sat behind the bar, watching as different chairs throughout the saloon moved slightly. Occasional tapping sounds came from the walls. Twice, I heard what sounded like spurs jingling across the wooden floor. When dawn finally arrived, warm light spilling through the windows, everything stopped. The air felt normal again. My phone showed several missed calls from the shell, unusual since our divorce, but I was too exhausted to care. I went through the closing procedures on autopilot, my worldview fundamentally altered. As I was leaving, Lorna arrived for the morning shift. "You look like hell," she said, studying my face. "Rule 4, I replied simply. She nodded. "The riders. They're usually just passing through." She patted my shoulder. "You did good. Come back tonight." "I don't know if I—" "Double pay for night shift," she interrupted, "and you'll need to listen carefully. There's more you need to know." That night, I returned, against all better judgment. Partly for the money, partly because I needed to understand what had happened. Lorna was waiting with a bottle of mezcal and 2 glasses. "Drink," she said. "Then I'll tell you about the things the Earp brothers never put in their stories." Lorna poured 2 generous servings of mezcal, sliding one across the bar to me. The smoky liquid burned, going down, but I welcomed the sensation. Anything to ground me in reality. "Tombstone wasn't built on silver alone," she began, her voice lower than usual. "The Earp brothers, Doc Holliday, they didn't just bring law. They brought attention. And attention brings things out of the desert that should stay buried." She got up and retrieved an old leather-bound book from behind the register. Its cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. "My great-grandmother's journal," she explained. "She worked here when it was called the Grand Hotel, before it became Kate's." The journal contained detailed accounts of Tombstone in the 1880s. Not just the famous gunfight at the OK Corral, but stranger occurrences. Prospectors returning from the Dragoon Mountains, with stories of creatures that walked on 2 legs but weren't men. Cattle mutilations attributed to Apache raids, but occurring on nights when no human tracks were found. Miners who disappeared into shafts that should have been too shallow to swallow them. "The Tohono O'odham people warned the settlers," Lorna said, tapping a page containing a crude sketch of a tall, emaciated figure. "They said this land had guardians, hungry ones. The settlers didn't listen." "What does this have to do with our rules?" I asked, trying to keep my skepticism intact despite what I'd witnessed. "Everything." She flipped through more pages. "See this?" December 1881, a woman in a red dress visited for 3 nights. By the 3rd night, 7 men had followed her out and were never seen again. I thought of Rule 2. If a woman in a red dress enters after 1 a.m., serve her only water. The locals called her La Seguidora, the harvester. Lorna took another drink. "She comes looking for souls in drought years. This is the driest summer since 1955. Am the old man with the hands?" I asked, remembering Rule 5. "That's Charlie." Her expression darkened. "Been coming here since before I was born. Never ages. Never drinks his whiskey, just smells it. Some say he made a deal with something in the desert when his mine went dry. The hands are part of that deal." Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the dusty main street in gold and crimson. Soon I'd have to open for the evening crowd. "What about the ghost riders?" I pressed. "And the bathroom that leads somewhere else?" "The riders are cowboys who died in the desert. They're mostly harmless, just passing through. But they draw other things behind them, like sharks following blood and water." She closed the journal carefully. "As for the bathroom, that's the worst. It opens to a place between places. If you hear crying, it's a trap. They mimic children to lure you in." "They?" She shook her head. "You don't want to know. Just follow the rules." That night started normally enough. A tour group from Scottsdale ordered rounds of beer and took selfies with the saloon's historical memorabilia. A few locals nursed whiskeys at the bar, including Sheriff Davis, off-duty, but still wearing his badge on his belt. Around midnight, I placed the reposado shot on the bar as instructed, then busied myself chopping limes. When I turned back, the glass was empty again. None of the customers seemed to have moved. Sheriff Davis caught my eye and gave a small, knowing nod. Later, as he paid his tab, he leaned in close. "Lorna filled you in?" he asked quietly. "Some," I admitted. "You know about all this?" "Fourth-generation lawman in Tombstone," he replied. "Some things don't make it into the official reports, but we keep track all the same. My grandfather's journals would curl your hair. He left me his card with a cell number scrawled on the back. Call if things get out of hand. Can't put it in the official response, but I'll come." By 1 a.m., most patrons had filtered out. Only a table of college kids remained, arguing good-naturedly about some historical inaccuracy in a Western they'd recently watched. I was considering last call when the front door swung open. She didn't so much enter as materialize. One moment the doorway was empty. The next she stood there. Her dress was the red of fresh blood, styled like something from the 1880s, but without a speck of dust, despite Tombstone's perpetually sandy streets. Her face was beautiful in a severe way, high cheekbones and full lips. But her eyes... I forced myself to look away, remembering Rule 2. Don't let her touch you. She glided to the bar, her movement too fluid, like she wasn't quite touching the floor. The college kids fell silent, all turning to stare. "Whiskey," she said, her voice musical, but with an undercurrent that raised goosebumps on my arms. "Your finest." My hand shook as I reached for a glass and filled it with water from the tap. I slid it across the bar, careful to maintain distance from her pale fingers. She looked down at the glass, then up at me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's not what I ordered." "It's all I can serve this late," I said, the lie sticking in my throat. She lifted the glass, sniffed it, then set it down untouched. Her gaze drifted to the college students who were still watching her, mesmerized. "Perhaps one of these gentlemen will buy me a proper drink," she murmured. Before I could intervene, one of the young men stood, approaching the bar with a dazed expression. "I'll get you whatever you want," he offered, his voice unnaturally eager. I moved quickly, placing myself between them. "Bar's closing," I announced. "Everyone out." The woman's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, they appeared completely black, like polished obsidian. "We have an arrangement with this establishment," she hissed, too low for others to hear. "You're new. You don't understand the consequences of refusing me." "Water or nothing," I insisted, heart hammering. A subtle change came over her face. Something shifted beneath the skin, like bones rearranging themselves. The temperature around us plummeted. Sheriff Davis's business card felt heavy in my pocket. I considered calling him, but feared turning my back on her. The spell broke when the bathroom door slammed open, the sound echoing through the saloon. A child's sob drifted out, high, frightened, desperate. Rule 3. If you hear crying from inside, lock it and put a out-of-order sign up until morning. The woman in red smiled, revealing teeth too sharp, too numerous. "You have a choice to make, bartender. Me or what waits in there." The college students, seeming to awaken from a trance, looked between me, the woman, and the darkened hallway with growing confusion and fear. "Everyone out now!" I shouted, my voice cracking. To my relief, they scrambled for the exit. The woman in red remained, her smile widening beyond what a human mouth should allow. "Running only makes it sweeter," she whispered, then turned and followed the students. I rushed to lock the door behind them, then grabbed the out-of-order sign and sprinted toward the bathroom. The crying grew louder, more insistent. A small voice called out, "Please, help me. I'm lost." My hand trembled as I slapped the sign on the door and turned the deadbolt. The crying transformed into something else, a low, guttural snarl that no human throat could produce. Something heavy slammed against the door from inside, making the wood bulge outward. I stumbled backward as the hinges creaked under the strain. Another impact. A crack appeared in the center panel. I fumbled for my phone, dialing Sheriff Davis with shaking fingers. "It's the bathroom," I gasped when he answered. "And the red dress woman. She followed some students out." "I'm 3 minutes away," he replied, the sound of an engine revving in the background. "Get salt from the kitchen. Line the door." I did as instructed, pouring a thick line of salt across the threshold. The pounding stopped immediately, replaced by an angry hissing sound. When Davis arrived, shotgun in hand, the door had gone silent. He inspected my salt line with approval. "You've bought us till sunrise," he said grimly. "Let's hope those college kids are faster than Waseguadora." We spent the night in tense silence, backs against the bar, facing the bathroom door. Just before dawn, my phone rang. The hospital. One of the students had been found wandering Highway 80, delirious and dehydrated, talking about a beautiful woman who'd led them into the desert. The other 3 were still missing. The search for the missing students dominated local news for the next 3 days. Search parties combed the desert around Tombstone, drones scanned the rugged terrain of the Dragoon Mountains, and flyers with their faces appeared in every shop window along Owen Street. I gave my statement to the police, an edited version where the students left with a woman, but I omitted her sharp teeth and impossible smile. Sheriff Davis corroborated my story, adding that the woman was a known local troublemaker who occasionally lured tourists into the desert for theft purposes. On the 4th day, they found 2 more students, alive but severely dehydrated, huddled in a shallow cave 15 miles outside town. They had no memory of how they'd gotten there, or what had happened to their remaining friend. The search continued, but the sheriff's expression told me what we both knew. The last student was gone for good. Lorna kept the saloon closed for those days, out of respect and caution. When we reopened, she hung a new photograph behind the bar, an old sepia-toned image of a woman in a red dress standing beside the original Grand Hotel. The woman's face was blurred, as if she'd moved during the exposure. "A reminder," Lorna said simply. My shift settled into an uneasy routine. Each night I'd place the tequila shot at midnight, careful never to watch who or what took it. I'd check the bathroom door hourly, listening for any sounds from within. So far, it had remained blessedly silent. On my 7th consecutive night shift, I met the old man from Rule 5. He arrived at exactly 10:17 p.m., the brass bell above the door announcing his entrance with a discordant jangle. The saloon wasn't particularly busy. A Tuesday in October meant fewer tourists, but every head turned as he shuffled in. He appeared to be in his 80s, wearing a weathered Stetson, faded jeans, and a denim jacket despite the lingering heat. His face was deeply lined, skin tanned to leather by decades in the Arizona sun. Nothing about him seemed extraordinary until he approached the bar, keeping his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "Whiskey," he rasped, his voice like gravel tumbling down a dry creek bed. "Straight up." I poured his drink, remembering Rule 5. The old man who sits at the corner table isn't human. Serve him, be polite, but never look at his hands. He took the glass without removing his hands from his pockets, somehow, and shuffled to the corner table, the one Lorna claimed had been Doc Holliday's favorite. As he sat, I caught a glimpse of something protruding from his sleeve. Not quite fingers, more like jointed segments of polished bone or antler. I forced my gaze away, focusing intently on wiping down the bar. When I risked another glance, the old man was sitting perfectly still, the whiskey untouched before him. He wasn't looking at the drink, but staring intently at a young couple seated by the window. The couple seemed oblivious to his attention, laughing and taking selfies with their commemorative "I survived" tombstone shot glasses. The man, barely more than a boy with his patchy attempt at a beard, had his arm around the woman who kept glancing anxiously at her watch. "Trouble coming," a voice murmured beside me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Sheriff Davis had appeared at the bar without my noticing. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a faded Diamondbacks t-shirt, but his eyes were fixed on the old man. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Charlie only shows up when someone in the bar is about to die," he said quietly. "Been that way since my grandfather's time." I looked back at the young couple. Them? Davis shrugged. Or someone else. You can never tell. But when Charlie comes, death isn't far behind. "That's comforting," I muttered. "Just keep an eye out and follow the rules. Speaking of which..." He nodded toward the bathroom door at the end of the hall. A customer, a middle-aged woman in a Tombstone souvenir t-shirt, was heading toward it. "Excuse me," I called, coming out from behind the bar. "That one's out of order. Please use the facilities by the kitchen." The woman changed direction without complaint. As I passed the bathroom door on my way back to the bar, I heard it. A soft scratching from inside, like fingernails on wood. My shift continued without incident until midnight, when I dutifully set out the Reposado tequila. As always, I turned away, this time to serve a group of bikers who'd stopped in Tombstone on their way to Tucson. When I turned back, the shot glass was empty, and the old man, Charlie, was standing at the bar, though I hadn't seen him move. "Another," he said, still keeping his hands hidden. As I poured his second whiskey, I noticed he was now staring at one of the bikers, a heavy-set man with a gray-streaked beard and arms covered in faded tattoos. "Why do they call you Charlie?" I asked, immediately regretting breaking my "be polite but don't engage" policy. He turned to me slowly, his eyes reflecting the bar lights oddly, like an animal's in headlights. "Short for charnel," he replied, his voice even rougher than before. "House of Bones." A chill crept up my spine as he took the whiskey glass, again without visible hands, and returned to his corner. Around 1 a.m., the young couple from earlier got up to leave. The woman stumbled slightly, the effects of several margaritas evident in her unsteady gait. Her boyfriend was in worse shape, his words slurring as he tried to pay their tab. "You folks have a safe way home?" I asked. "Uber," the woman said, holding up her phone. "Our hotel's just in Benson." Benson was about 25 miles away. Not far, but a dark drive through desert country at night. As they left, Charlie's gaze followed them, his head turning with a stiff, mechanical motion. A minute later, he stood, left his still untouched whiskey, and shuffled toward the exit. Sheriff Davis, who'd been nursing the same beer for hours, straightened. "Not good," he muttered. "Should we stop them?" I asked. "Can't interfere," he replied grimly. "Charlie's just the messenger, not the cause." An hour later, my phone buzzed with a news alert from the local station. A serious accident on Highway 80. A vehicle had gone off the road near the Mule Mountains. No details on survivors. The rest of the night passed in somber silence. The bikers eventually left, the heavy-set man giving Charlie's empty table a wide berth, as if sensing something off about it. Davis stayed until closing, helping me stack chairs and sweep the floors. As dawn approached, the smell hit me. Burning sage, strong, and unmistakable. Rule 6. If you smell burning sage, go to the storeroom and stay there until the smell is gone. Don't investigate. Storage room now, Davis ordered, recognizing my expression. We hurried to the small storeroom behind the kitchen, closing the heavy door behind us. The smell of liquor bottles and cleaning supplies was preferable to what waited outside. "What's with the sage?" I whispered. "Protection ritual," Davis explained, sitting on a crate of beer. "But not one meant for us. The desert has its own rules, its own practitioners. When they're working, we stay out of the way." Through the small window high on the storeroom wall, I could see the sky beginning to lighten. A figure passed by outside, tall and gaunt, moving with a stiff gait across the back lot of the saloon. It carried something in its arms. "Don't look," Davis warned, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The figure stopped directly in the window's view. Even in the pre-dawn gloom, I could make out antlers extending from its head. Not like a deer's, but wrong somehow, asymmetrical and distorted. Its face was stretched vertically, mouth extending too far down its chest. It was carrying the missing student. The young man's body was limp, but I could see his chest rising and falling weakly. He was alive, barely. The creature tilted its elongated head, seeming to sniff the air. Then it turned, looking directly at our window with eyes that reflected the faint light like pools of oil. I ducked down, heart hammering. Davis had his gun out, though his hands were shaking. "What is that?" I hissed. "The locals call it skinwalker, but that's not quite right," he replied, voice tight. "It's something the tribes in these parts have known about for centuries. The whites who settled here gave it different names, Wendigo being the most common. The smell of sage grew overwhelming, seeping even into our refuge. Outside, I heard a sound like dry branches snapping, followed by a low, mournful howl that no human or animal throat could produce. "It's hungry," Davis continued. "Always hungry. That's why the rules exist, to keep it fed without it taking everyone." The tequila shot, I realized. The woman in red, their offerings. Davis nodded grimly. "Controlled feeding. Better one disappears occasionally than it comes into town hungry." "That's monstrous," I protested. "No," he corrected. "That's survival in Tombstone. Been this way since before the OK Corral. The Earps knew it. Doc Holliday knew it. Now you know it." We stayed in that storeroom until full daylight, neither of us speaking further. When the smell of sage finally dissipated, Davis cautiously opened the door. The morning news reported a miracle. The third missing student had been found wandering on Highway 80, dehydrated and confused, but alive. The couple from the bar hadn't been so lucky. Their Uber driver survived with minor injuries, but both passengers died when the cars swerved to avoid something large crossing the road. When I next saw Charlie, 2 nights later, he nodded at me once, a gesture of acknowledgement or respect. I couldn't tell which. His whiskey remained untouched, as always. I was beginning to understand the true nature of my job at Big Nose Kate's. I wasn't just serving drinks. I was serving as a gatekeeper between worlds, maintaining a fragile peace through ritualized offerings and strict adherence to rules written in blood and survival. And I was starting to wonder if Mateo's death wasn't an accident, but a promotion. His way of selecting his replacement. 2 weeks passed without incident. I followed the rules meticulously. Midnight tequila shots disappeared when my back was turned. Charlie visited 3 more times, each visit followed by a death reported in the local paper. And I kept the bathroom door locked whenever the faintest sound emerged from within. The woman in red hadn't returned, but Sheriff Davis assured me she would. Drought years always brought her multiple times. "October's the worst," he warned. "Veil gets thin near Halloween." I started researching Tombstone's history beyond the tourist-friendly narratives of cowboy shootouts and silver mining. The local library had a restricted section of historical documents, accessible only with special permission. Fortunately, Marge, the elderly librarian, was a regular at Kate's and happily granted me access when I mentioned Lorna had sent me. The restricted archives contained newspaper clippings, journals, and official reports that painted a disturbing picture. Every decade since Tombstone's founding in 1877 had seen periods of unexplained disappearances, livestock mutilations, and strange deaths. The official explanations varied: Apache raids, mining accidents, desert exposure, but the patterns were consistent. Most revealing was a journal belonging to Wyatt Earp himself, donated anonymously in the 1930s. Amid accounts of law enforcement and gunfights were cryptic entries. May 18, 1881. Doc says the arrangement must be maintained. 3 gone this month already. The thing in the hills grows bolder. Morgan suggests we organize a hunting party, but Doc insists that would only make it angry. I defer to his judgment in this matter. June 2nd, 1881. The woman in scarlet returned to the Grand Hotel. 2 miners followed her out. Their claim stakes will be reassigned tomorrow. Such is the price of silver in these hills. October 29th, 1881. 3 days until our agreement with C must be honored. Doc has procured the necessary items. I find myself unable to fully commit these arrangements to paper, lest they be discovered. God forgive us, but this town must survive. 3 days later, on October 26th, 1881, the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral took place. The official story involves a dispute between the Earps and the Clanton-McLaury gang over arms control in Tombstone. But Earp's journal suggested something else. A sacrifice disguised as a shootout, fulfilling some dark pact with C. Charlie. I shared my findings with Lorna one afternoon before opening. She listened silently, occasionally nodding as if I was confirming things she already knew. "The basement," she said finally. "You need to see the basement." Big Nose Kate's, like many buildings in historic Tombstone, had a basement. Unusual for Arizona construction, but necessary in the mining boomtown days for storing supplies and providing cool refuge from the desert heat. Lorna led me down narrow wooden stairs that creaked ominously beneath our weight. The air grew cooler, tinged with mineral dampness and something else, a metallic tang that reminded me of old pennies. "The original saloon floor," she explained, gesturing to the rough-hewn beams above us. "What tourists walk on now is the 3rd iteration. The first 2 had to be replaced. Because blood soaks into wood," she said simply. "No amount of scrubbing gets it completely clean." She guided me to the far corner where the foundation stones of the building were visible. Carved into them were symbols, not graffiti, but deliberate markings cut deep into the rock. They resembled nothing I had seen before. Not quite Native American, not quite European. "Protection marks," Lorna explained. "The original owner was Portuguese. Brought old world knowledge with him." In the center of the basement stood a solid stone pillar, out of place among the wooden support beams. It was roughly cylindrical, about 4 feet high, with a slightly concave top. Stains darkened the stone, running down its sides in dried rivulets. "An altar?" I guessed. Lorna nodded. "The building was constructed around it. It was here before Tombstone existed." "What is it for?" "It's a boundary marker. A doorway and a lock, all in one." She traced one of the symbols carved into its base. "The things outside, the woman, the hungry one in the hills, what lives behind the bathroom door, they want in. This keeps them regulated. The rules maintain the balance, I said, understanding dawning. Yes, each rule serves a purpose. The tequila shot is an offering to the guardians. The woman in red must be denied what she truly seeks. Blood, not water. The bathroom doorway must remain sealed. And Charlie? Lorna's expression darkened. Charlie is the collector. When the balance tips too far, he comes to restore it. By taking lives, by taking what's already marked for death. She sighed. You've seen his hands? I shook my head. I follow Rule 5. Good, keep it that way. Those who see what lies beneath his gloves don't live long afterward. She moved toward a small alcove I hadn't noticed before. There's one more thing you should see. The alcove contained a simple wooden cabinet. Lorna produced a key from around her neck and unlocked it, revealing several dusty bottles of clear liquid. Mezcal, she said. Not for drinking, for Rule 7. I recalled. Never, ever turn off all the lights. Even during closing, leave the bar lamp on until sunrise. What happens if all the lights go out? I asked. The boundary weakens. She handed me one of the bottles. If the lights ever fail completely, power outage, electrical fire, whatever, pour this in a circle around yourself and the bar lamp. Light the lamp. Stay in the circle until dawn. And if I don't, then pray the hunger outside is quick. She relocked the cabinet. Mateo forgot. Or maybe he was just tired after 15 years. During that storm last month, the one that knocked out power to half the county, he didn't use the mezcal. My blood chilled remembering how Mateo had died. The thing that got him, was it the woman? Charlie? The bathroom thing? No. Lorna's voice dropped to barely audible. Something worse. Something that only comes in absolute darkness. The locals call it Sazawak, the shadow hunger. Back upstairs, preparing for the evening shift, I couldn't shake the image of that stone altar with its ancient stains. Tombstone had been built on silver, but it was maintained on blood. Controlled sacrifices to keep greater horrors at bay. That night, a strong storm blew in from the mountains. The weather report called it unexpected, a remnant of a Pacific hurricane tracking unusually far inland. By 10 p.m., rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled across the desert. Few customers braved the weather, just a handful of locals, including Davis, who sat at the bar cleaning his service weapon. An unusual breach of protocol that he justified with a meaningful glance toward the bathroom door. Storm stirs things up, he explained quietly, like shaking a hornet's nest. Around 11:30, the lights flickered as a particularly violent thunderclap shook the building. I immediately checked that the mezcal bottle was within reach beneath the bar. Midnight came, and I set out the tequila shot as always. Lightning illuminated the empty saloon in harsh white flashes, casting strange, elongated shadows across the floor. In one such flash, I glimpsed a figure standing by the shot glass. Tall, gaunt, with an elongated face and antlers stretching toward the ceiling. When the light returned to normal, the shot glass was empty, and the figure was gone. "Davis," I whispered urgently. "It's inside." He chambered around in his pistol. The hungry one doesn't usually come in. Must be desperate because of the storm. Will that gun even hurt it? No, he admitted. But it makes me feel better. The lights flickered again, longer this time. When they stabilized, Charlie was sitting at his usual table, though I hadn't seen or heard him enter. He wasn't looking at any particular customer. Instead, his gaze was fixed on me. Something scratched at the bathroom door. Not the usual gentle sounds, but violent, desperate clawing. The wood began to splinter around the lock. "Circle of mezcal," Davis ordered, his voice tight. "Now." I reached for the bottle just as every light in the building went out. In the pitch blackness, I heard movement. A shuffling across the wooden floor. the bathroom door finally giving way with a crack of breaking wood and a soft rattling inhalation that seemed to pull at the very air in my lungs. Davis's lighter flared to life, illuminating his face in ghastly orange. "The lamp!" he hissed. "Light it now!" My fingers found the old oil lamp kept beneath the bar. With shaking hands, I filled it with mezcal, my eyes straining to see beyond our tiny circle of light. Davis passed me his lighter, and I touched flame to wick. As the lamp blazed to life, I poured mezcal in a hasty circle around us and the bar, just as Lorna had instructed. The liquid caught fire, creating a ring of blue flame that illuminated a scene from Nightmare. The thing from the bathroom crouched just beyond our circle, a pale, emaciated figure with too many joints, and a face that seemed composed entirely of teeth. Behind it loomed the antlered silhouette, its elongated fingers reaching toward us but stopping at the barrier of flames, and standing between them, his back to us, was Charlie. His hat removed, revealing not a human head, but a skull picked clean of flesh, antler fragments protruding from the bone. His hands were finally visible, extended from two long arms, not hands at all, but assemblages of small animal bones fitted together in rough approximation of fingers. "The collector," Davis breathed. "He's protecting the balance." All we could do was wait as inhuman shapes circled our sanctuary of light, testing the boundaries, seeking entry. Outside, the storm raged on, and dawn seemed an eternity away. Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Our circle of mezcal-fueled flames provided light and protection, but it wouldn't last forever. Already the fire was dimming in places, the alcohol burning away. "We need to maintain the circle," Davis murmured, pulling the flask from his jacket. "Got any more of that mezcal?" I reached beneath the bar for another bottle, careful not to break our protective ring. Outside our sanctuary, shapes moved in the darkness, sometimes pressing close enough that I could make out details I wish I hadn't seen. Other times retreating into shadow, leaving only the sound of claws on wood and breathing that didn't follow human rhythms. Charlie, or the thing wearing his form, remained motionless between us and the creatures. His assembled bone hands hung at his sides, his skull head tilted at an angle that suggested watchfulness. Whether he was protecting us or simply maintaining his territory, I couldn't tell. "What happens if the lamp goes out?" I whispered. Davis's face was grim in the flickering light. Then we faced Sazawak. The shadow hunger doesn't just kill you, it unmakes you. Erases everything you were. Like what happened to Mateo. He nodded. The darkness got him, but not completely. That's why there was still a body. If Tsaksiwak had finished feeding, there would have been nothing left. No corpse, no memory of him in people's minds, no records of his existence. I shuddered, eyeing the lamp's dwindling oil. How much longer until dawn? Davis checked his watch. 3 hours, give or take. A crash from the kitchen made us both jump. Something heavy had fallen, or been pushed over. The few remaining customers huddled together near the pool table, their faces pale with terror in the dim light of their phone flashlights. "We need to expand the circle," I said. "Get everyone inside it." "Too risky," Davis countered. "We don't have enough mezcal to make it that large, and if we break this circle to make a new one..." He didn't need to finish. The things waiting in the darkness would be on us instantly. A shriek cut through the silence, high, terrified, human. One of the customers, a local rancher named Miguel, was being dragged toward the bathroom doorway by pale, elongated arms that had somehow reached across the room. His boots scraped helplessly against the wooden floor as he clawed for purchase. Davis raised his gun but hesitated. I might hit Miguel. Before I could respond, Charlie moved. His motion was sudden and precise. nothing like the shuffling gait of the old man he pretended to be. He crossed the room in 3 impossible strides, bone hands extending to grasp the pale arms pulling Miguel. There was a sound like dry branches snapping, and the arms released their prey, retreating into the darkness of the bathroom. Charlie turned his skull face toward Miguel, who scrambled backward on the floor, whimpering. For a moment, I thought Charlie might claim him instead, restore the balance by taking what the bathroom entity had tried to steal. But he merely pointed one bone finger toward our circle of flame. He's telling him to come to us, I realized. "Miguel," I called. "Run to the bar now." The rancher didn't need to be told twice. He bolted across the open space, diving over the bar counter and landing beside us, just as something large and dark swooped down from the ceiling, something with too many wings and a mouth that opened vertically. Charlie intercepted this new threat as well, his bone hands catching the winged entity and crushing it with a wet, sickening sound. Black ichor splattered across the floor, hissing where it landed like acid on wood. "Bring the others," Davis decided, pulling out his flask again. "I'll expand the circle as they come, one at a time, carefully." I called out instructions to the remaining customers, 3 locals who were regulars enough to trust us without question. One by one, they made their way to our sanctuary as Davis carefully extended our circle of fire to accommodate them, using his flask of whiskey to supplement our dwindling mezcal. The last customer, Annie Whitehorse, a Tohono O'odham woman who owned a gift shop next door, was halfway to us when the front door burst open. Wind and rain swept in, extinguishing a portion of our fire circle. In the doorway stood the woman in red, her dress now sodden, her hair plastered to her skull, revealing pointed ears and skin that glistened like fish scales in the lamplight. "Invitation rescinded," she hissed, her voice somehow carrying over the storm. "The boundary is broken." Charlie turned to face this new threat, positioning himself between her and our group. They regarded each other like old adversaries, or perhaps old allies, now at odds. "The compact remains," Charlie said, his voice emanating not from the skull, but from somewhere deeper, as if coming from beneath the floorboards. It was the first time I'd heard him speak more than a few words, and the sound made my teeth ache. 3 months more until the solstice payment. The woman's mouth stretched into a smile that split her face almost literally, the edges of the wound-like grin reaching nearly to her ears. "The one who maintained your precious rules is gone. His replacement is insufficient." With horror, I realized she was talking about me. "Hey," I protested before Davis elbowed me sharply. "Don't engage," he whispered. "Names have power here." Annie Whitehorse had taken advantage of the standoff to make it to our circle. As she stepped across the flickering barrier, she pulled something from around her neck. A small leather pouch that smelled strongly of sage and other herbs. "The boundary holds," she said, her voice steady despite the terror etched on her face, "as it has since before your time came to these lands, Seguidora." The woman in red hissed, taking a step back. "The old ways fade, medicine woman. Your people's numbers dwindle. Soon there will be none to remember the wards and bindings. I have taught my daughters, as my mother taught me," Annie replied, untying the pouch. "The knowledge remains." She withdrew a pinch of the mixture and cast it into our lamp. The flame turned from orange to an intense blue-white, suddenly burning brighter. The renewed light pushed back the darkness, revealing more of our unwelcome visitors, spindly figures clinging to the walls, a hunched form behind the bar that scuttled away on too many legs, and the bathroom entity, now fully emerged. A tall, skeletal thing with skin that hung in loose folds, its face a vertical slit that opened to reveal row upon row of needle-like teeth. "Fire of purification," Annie explained, adding another pinch to the flame. My grandmother was keeper of the flame at San Xavier. Some traditions persevere. The woman in red stepped back, raising her hands as if in surrender. This night only, she said to Charlie. Let the hunger grows in the hills. Your tequila and occasional wanderer no longer satisfy. When the compact comes due at solstice, we will renegotiate terms. She turned to leave, then paused, looking directly at me. The last bartender lasted 15 years. I give you 15 weeks. With that, she vanished. Not walking away, but simply ceasing to exist between one blink and the next. Charlie nodded once to Annie, a gesture of respect or perhaps gratitude, then returned to his vigil between us and the remaining creatures. The bathroom entity had retreated somewhat, but still lurked in the hallway, its breathing audible in the momentary quiet as the storm outside began to abate. What did she mean about 15 weeks? I asked Davis. The compact, he replied grimly. Every solstice and equinox, there's a reckoning. The balance must be maintained through larger offerings. Human sacrifices, I said flatly. Annie shook her head. Not in the way you think. The town provides alternatives. Livestock mostly, conducted away from prying eyes. But if the offerings are deemed insufficient. She didn't need to finish. The implication was clear. The things outside would take what they felt they were owed, agreement or not. And Mateo was in charge of this? I asked. He was the intermediary, Davis explained. Every town with a boundary needs one. Tombstone's had a designated keeper since its founding. Doc Holliday was one of the first. Why me? I'm not from here. I don't know the first thing about supernatural pacts. Mateo chose you, Annie said simply. Before he died, he added your name to the ledger. What ledger? Davis and Annie exchanged glances. The Book of Names, she explained. It records every keeper, every offering, every breach of the boundary since 1877. It's kept in the basement, behind the altar stone. My head was spinning. 2 months ago, I'd been a recently divorced bartender, looking for a fresh start. Now, I was apparently the designated intermediary between the town of Tombstone and the supernatural hunger that surrounded it. I never agreed to this, I protested. None of us do, Davis said quietly. But here we are. The lamp flickered, the enhanced flame beginning to dim. Annie added another pinch of her mixture, but her pouch was nearly empty. Will it last until dawn? I asked. She nodded. Barely. But we have another problem. She pointed to Charlie, who had begun to sway slightly, his bone hands trembling. The collector weakens. He's been manifested too long without claiming his due. What does that mean for us? It means, Davis said grimly, that someone in this circle might not see morning. Charlie turned his skull face toward us, empty eye sockets somehow fixing on each person in turn. When his gaze reached me, I felt a cold certainty. I was being assessed, measured for worth. He can't take me, I blurted out. I'm the new keeper, right? The town needs me. Annie placed a hand on my arm. That's not how it works. The balance demands payment. Then who? I looked around our small group, Miguel still shaking from his near abduction, Annie with her pouch of protective herbs, Davis with his useless gun, and the other locals huddled together in fear. Charlie's gaze settled on Davis, who straightened his shoulders as if accepting a burden. No, I said, stepping forward. There has to be another way. Annie's grip tightened on my arm. Don't offer alternatives lightly. The collector might accept. Outside, the storm was finally passing. Through the windows, I could see the faintest lightening of the eastern sky. Dawn was approaching, but still at least an hour away. The bathroom entity chose that moment to make another attempt, lunging from the hallway toward our circle. Charlie intercepted it, bone hands grappling with pale, elongated limbs. They struggled in a silent, terrifying dance, moving with speeds that blurred my vision when I tried to focus on them. Our lamp dimmed further. Annie used the last of her mixture, but the flames sputtered weakly. "We need more time," she whispered. As if in response, the lights above flickered once, then blazed back to life. The power had returned. In the sudden brightness, the creatures recoiled. The bathroom entity broke free from Charlie's grasp and retreated, slithering back into the hallway with unreal speed. Other shapes that had lingered in dark corners scuttled away, seeking shadows. Charlie remained, his true form fully visible now in the harsh electric light, a skeleton assembled from mismatched bones, antler fragments protruding from the skull, held together by nothing I could perceive. He studied us for a long moment, then turned toward Davis. "Wait," I called out, surprised by my own voice. "Take me to the Book of Names. Show me what I need to know." Charlie paused, skull tilting in consideration. "I accept the role," I continued, the words coming from some instinct I didn't fully understand. "As keeper of the boundary, I offer myself as guarantor of the compact until the solstice." The collector studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, a jerky, weird motion. He gestured toward the basement door with one bone hand. "Now?" I asked, glancing at my watch. "Dawn's almost here." "The transition must happen in darkness," Annie explained. "Once the sun rises, the moment will pass." I looked at Davis, who nodded encouragement. "I'll watch things up here. Go." Heart pounding, I followed Charlie's skeletal form toward the basement door, wondering what I'd just committed myself to and how many dawns I had left to see. The basement felt different in darkness, alive somehow, the air thick with anticipation. Charlie descended the stairs ahead of me, bone fragments clicking against the wooden steps. The only light came from my phone flashlight, which cast grotesque, elongated shadows of the collector's skeletal form across the stone walls. At the altar stone, Charlie stopped and pointed with one bone finger to a small depression in the floor I hadn't noticed during my previous visit with Lorna. Kneeling, I found a metal ring embedded in the stone. It took all my strength to pull, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside lay an old leather-bound volume, its cover stained dark and cracked with age. No title marked its spine or cover, just a simple branded symbol that matched one of the markings on the altar stone. A circular design with a vertical line bisecting it. As I reached for the book, Charlie's bone hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. The touch was cold, dry, like handling ancient artifacts in a museum. He made a warning sound, like wind through a rock crevice, then reached into the compartment himself and retrieved a small silver knife that had lain beneath the book. He offered the knife to me, handle first. The message was clear. "Blood," I said, understanding. "It needs blood to open." Charlie's skull dipped in what might have been a nod. I hesitated only briefly before pressing the knife to my palm and making a small cut. Blood welled up, surprisingly bright in the dim light. Charlie guided my bleeding hand to the book's cover, where the blood seemed to sink into the leather, disappearing completely. The book warmed beneath my touch, and the clasp that had held it closed sprang open. "I'm really doing this," I muttered to myself, an attempt to ground my racing thoughts in mundane observation. Bleeding on magical books in a basement at 4 a.m. Michelle would have a field day with this. Charlie made no response, simply watching with his empty eye sockets as I carefully opened the Book of Names. The first page bore a simple inscription in faded brown ink. "Herein is recorded the compact of Tombstone, established on the Feast of St. Michael, 1877, between the founders and the guardians of the land. Let all who maintain this record honor the agreement in blood and spirit, lest the hunger return unfettered. I turned the page to find a list of names, each written in different handwriting, with dates beside them. Jonathan Reeves, 1877 to 1879, died fulfilling the compact Maxwell Green, 1879 to 1883, claimed by the Red Woman John Henry, Doc Holliday, 1883 to 1887, released by mutual agreement. The list continued down the page and on to several more, a chilling record of those who had served as keeper before me. Some entries noted decades of service, others mere months. The causes of their ends varied. Many died fulfilling the compact. Others were claimed by various entities. A few released or retired. Mateo's name was the last. Mateo Rivera, 2009 to 2024. Veiled the darkness, and beneath it, in the same handwriting but shakier, as if written in haste or pain, Daniel Weiss, 2024 to present. Chosen as successor. My own name, written by Mateo's dying hand. He knew, I whispered. He knew he was going to die. Charlie made a sound like dry leaves rustling, perhaps his version of affirmation. The pages that followed contained detailed accounts of each keeper's term, recording offerings made, bargains struck, and breaches of the boundary. Doc Holliday's entries were particularly detailed, written in an elegant hand that described encounters with the antlered hunger and negotiations with she who walks in red. The most recent entries were Mateo's, describing the monthly offerings of tequila, occasional livestock sacrifices, and, most disturbing, the necessary surrenders of individuals who had violated certain rules of Tombstone. These weren't innocent victims, but people who had committed serious offenses. A man who had murdered his wife, a woman who had deliberately set fire to the historical museum, a teenager who had desecrated native graves of the old mission. Justice of a sort, delivered outside human law. The final pages detailed the terms of the compact itself. The boundary around Tombstone would be maintained, protecting the town from the supernatural entities of the desert in exchange for regular offerings. The keeper served as intermediary, responsible for ensuring the offerings were made and the rules followed. Most critically, each solstice and equinox required a major offering, traditionally livestock, but in times of drought or when the hunger grew too great, human offerings became necessary. The next such reckoning was the winter solstice, less than 15 weeks away. As I read, the stone altar began to glow faintly, emitting a soft blue light that illuminated the basement better than my phone flashlight. Charlie stepped back, bone hands raised as if in deference to something I couldn't see. The air shimmered above the altar, coalescing into a translucent figure, an elderly Native American man wearing a mixture of traditional dress and 19th century Western clothing. He regarded me with eyes that held immeasurable weariness. "You have accepted the role," he said, his voice echoing as if coming from a great distance. "The blood compact is acknowledged." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I am the first keeper," he replied. "Before the white men named this place Tombstone, my people called it Tacho Soda, the place of hungry ground. I made the first bargain to protect my tribe from what dwells in the hills." "The Wendigo," I said, recalling Davis's words. The apparition shook his head. "Your people's name for it, not ours. We called it Gani, the hunger that walks. It was here before humans, and will remain long after. The compact keeps it fed, but contained. And the woman in red, the thing in the bathroom. Lesser hungers, drawn to the boundary. They feed on fear and flesh, while Gani feeds on spirit itself." The figure gestured to Charlie. The collector maintains the balance between offerings. When too many are taken, he restores. When too few are given, he claims. And I'm supposed to... what? Choose who gets sacrificed. You maintain the rules. You ensure the offerings. You protect the many by sacrificing the few. The apparition's form began to waver. The winter solstice approaches. The drought has made the hunger greater. Prepare accordingly. Wait, I called. How? What am I supposed to offer? But the figure had already dissipated, the blue glow fading from the altar stone. Charlie remained, his bone hands now extended toward me, palms up. I understood. You need payment for protecting us tonight. The skull dipped in affirmation. But not me, I said, and not my friends upstairs. Another dip? Then who? Charlie turned toward the stairs. Above us, the saloon had gone quiet. The creatures retreated. The storm passed. Dawn was minutes away. But Charlie wasn't indicating anyone currently in the building. A terrible understanding dawned on me. You want me to choose someone. A sacrifice. The skull tilted, considering. Then one bone finger extended, pointing not at me, but at the book of names still open in my hands. I looked down at Mateo's entries again, noting how he had selected individuals who had already committed grave offenses. Someone who deserves it, I whispered. Is that how it works? Charlie made no response, but his meaning was clear. As keeper, part of my role was judgment, selecting who would feed the hungry things beyond the boundary. My stomach churned at the thought. I need time, I said, to understand this responsibility. Charlie's skull dipped once more, but his posture remained expectant. He needed payment now, not later. Desperately, I flipped through the book of names, seeking precedent or guidance. In Holiday's entries, I found a possible solution. When no suitable offering presented itself, I provided blood and spirit in measured quantity, not enough to claim me, but sufficient to maintain the compact for one lunar cycle. My blood, I said, understanding. Not my life, but enough to satisfy temporarily. Charlie's bone hands came together in a gesture almost like prayer. I took the silver knife again, steeling myself. This wouldn't be a small cut like before. Taking a deep breath, I drew the blade across my forearm, deep enough that blood flowed freely. The pain was immediate and intense, but I gritted my teeth and held my arm over the altar stone, letting the blood drip onto its concave surface. Charlie stepped forward, bone fingers reaching toward the pooling blood. As he touched it, the blood began to glow with the same blue light as before. A cold sensation spread up my arm, not painful but draining, as if more than just blood was being taken. The room darkened around me, my vision narrowing to just the glowing blood and Charlie's skeletal form. I heard distant voices, crying, pleading, laughing, all mingling together into a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm my senses. Then suddenly it stopped. Charlie stepped back, the blue glow faded, and my blood was gone from the altar stone without a trace. My arm still bore the cut, but it had stopped bleeding, the edges of the wound already showing signs of healing. Is it done? I asked, my voice hoarse. Charlie nodded once, then gestured to the book of names. I understood that I needed to record what had just occurred. Finding Mateo's pen still tucked in the back of the book, I wrote my first entry. October 17th, 2024. Interim payment made him keeper's blood to satisfy the collector after boundary breach during storm. Full reckoning still required at winter solstice. As I finished writing, the first rays of dawn filtered through the small basement window. Charlie's form began to change, bones knitting back together beneath suddenly manifesting flesh. Within seconds, he appeared human again, the elderly man in the Stetson and denim jacket, hands now covered by worn leather gloves. He nodded to me once more, then walked up the stairs with the shuffling gait I recognized from his visits to the bar. When I followed a moment later, the saloon was returning to normal. Lights on, no sign of the night's supernatural visitors. Davis and Annie were helping the other locals clean up the scattered furniture and broken glass. Charlie tipped his hat to Annie as he passed, then left through the front door without a word. Through the windows, I watched him walk down the empty main street, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Just before he turned the corner, he seemed to shimmer slightly, then vanished entirely. "He's satisfied," Annie said, coming to stand beside me. "For now." I touched my arm where the cut had been, now just a thin red line that looked weeks old rather than minutes. I gave him blood. Not a full sacrifice, but enough to buy time. She nodded. An old solution. Dangerous, though. Each time you pay with your own essence, a piece stays gone. "I'll find another way before the solstice," I said, though I had no idea how. Davis joined us, his face haggard from the long night. "You're officially the keeper now," he said. "I saw the book accepted you." "Not much choice," I replied bitterly. "There's always choice," Annie countered. "Mateo chose you for a reason. He believed you could do what he couldn't, find a balance that minimizes the suffering." I thought of the rules, seemingly arbitrary instructions that actually maintained a complex, supernatural ecosystem. I thought of Mateo, following them faithfully for 15 years before finally making a fatal mistake. "First," I said, "I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. No more half explanations or cryptic warnings. I want to know everything about these entities, the compact, and what's expected of me." "The book," Davis began, "is a record, not an instruction manual," I interrupted. "I need more." Annie smiled faintly. "My grandmother's journals might help. She was a medicine woman who worked with 3 different keepers. Come by the shop tomorrow." I nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. The adrenaline of the night was fading, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. "Get some rest," Davis advised. "Lorna can handle the day shift." As they left to help the other locals, I took one more look at the morning sun illuminating Tombstone's historic buildings. Tourists would soon arrive, taking photos of the OK Corral and Big Nose Kate's saloon, completely unaware of what had transpired during the night, or what lurked beyond the town's invisible boundary, watching and waiting for the next offering. I had 15 weeks to prepare for the solstice reckoning. 15 weeks to figure out how to satisfy ancient, hungry entities without sacrificing innocent lives. 15 weeks to master rules that Mateo had spent 15 years following. And if I failed, I'd join the long list of keepers who hadn't survived their first year. The week following that harrowing night passed in a blur of research and revelations. By day, I pored over Annie Whitehorse's grandmother's journals, which documented decades of supernatural occurrences in Tombstone with clinical precision. By night, I tended bar at Kate's, placing the midnight tequila shot with new understanding and keeping vigilant watch on the bathroom door. The journals painted a complex picture of Tombstone's hidden history. Long before silver was discovered, the area had been considered sacred and dangerous by local tribes. The Tohono O'Odham people avoided it except for specific ceremonial purposes. When prospector Ed Schieffelin arrived in 1877, native scouts warned him that all he would find was his tombstone, the comment that eventually gave the town its name. What the history books didn't record was that Schieffelin's first mining camp was decimated in a single night, not by Apaches as officially reported, but by something that emerged from the Dragoon Mountains during a drought. The few survivors, including Schieffelin himself, sought help from a local medicine man who proposed the first version of the compact. The arrangement was simple but terrible. The hungry things would be given regular offerings, and in exchange, they would not hunt indiscriminately. A keeper would be appointed to maintain the boundary and ensure the offerings were made. Doc Holliday's appointment as keeper came after a series of failures. His predecessor had attempted to renege on the compact, resulting in what history recorded as a cholera outbreak that killed dozens. Holliday, already dying of tuberculosis and intimately familiar with mortality, approached the role with pragmatic fatalism. His innovation, documented in both the Book of Names and Amy's grandmother's journals, was to deliberately direct the hunger toward those he deemed deserving of judgment. The famed gunfight at the OK Corral was secretly a calculated offering, timed to coincide with an equinox reckoning. This pattern continued through Tombstone's history, each keeper finding ways to satisfy the compact while minimizing innocent casualties. Some were more successful than others. During Prohibition, one keeper had established an underground trade, luring gangsters from Phoenix and Tucson with promises of bootlegged liquor, only to offer them to what the journals called the Antlered One. Annie's shop, Frontier Relics and Remedies, became my sanctuary between shifts at Kate's. Unlike the kitschy tourist traps that lined Allen Street, her place sold authentic artifacts and traditional medicines. The back room housed her private collection of historical documents and family records. "My people have been recording these entities for centuries," she explained, showing me petroglyphs photographed in nearby cave systems. The Spanish missionaries tried to categorize them as demons, but they're something older. "What exactly is the Antlered One?" I asked. "The Wendigo thing." Annie shook her head. "That's a northern tribal concept. The Ghani is similar but distinct. It was once human, a tribal leader who turned to consuming human flesh during a terrible famine. His hunger transformed him, made him something beyond human. And the woman in red, La Seguidora, came with the Spanish," she said. "Some say she was a nobleman's wife who made dark bargains when her husband abandoned her in the New World. Others believe she's much older, merely adopting that form when the Europeans arrived. She feeds on desire, drawing victims with promises before taking their essence." "And the thing in the bathroom?" Annie's expression darkened. "That one has many names. My grandmother called it Chewy Hoak, the Mud Woman. She steals children who wander too far from camp. The bathroom door sometimes opens to her realm." I rubbed my temples, trying to absorb it all. "And Charlie, the collector, he maintains balance, takes people when too many disappear?" "Not exactly. He ensures the compact is respected on both sides. When the hungry ones take more than agreed, he claims from them. When humans fail to provide sufficient offerings, he claims from us." She closed her grandmother's journal carefully. "He is neither ally nor enemy, simply the enforcer." Armed with this knowledge, I began developing my own plan for the approaching solstice. If previous keepers could direct the hunger toward the deserving, perhaps I could do the same, but without bloodshed. Sheriff Davis was skeptical when I approached him. We sat in his cruiser outside the courthouse, speaking in low voices despite being alone. "You want to offer what, exactly? If not blood?" he asked. "Essence," I explained. Annie's grandmother's journals mention that what these entities truly crave isn't just flesh, but human essence. Emotions, experiences, memories. Maybe we can provide that without killing anyone. Davis frowned. "You're talking about something spiritual. That's dangerous territory. More dangerous than human sacrifice." He conceded the point with a grim nod. What do you need from me? Access to county records. I need to research solstice and equinox events going back as far as possible. I want to see if there are patterns, exceptions, anything that might help. The records told a sobering story. While most reckoning days had indeed involved blood offerings, there were exceptions, particularly during the early 1900s, when a keeper named Elena Valdez had developed an alternative. According to her journal entries in the Book of Names, Elena had discovered that intense shared experiences, specifically fear, awe, and catharsis, generated spiritual essence that satisfied the hunger almost as well as blood. She had organized elaborate events on solstices and equinoxes, gatherings that appeared to be simple town celebrations, but were actually carefully orchestrated rituals. Her system worked for nearly 20 years, before failing catastrophically in 1923. The entry simply stated, "The hunger grew too great. Substitutes no longer suffice. Blood was required and taken." Still, it gave me something to work with. As the solstice drew closer, I established my own versions of the rules, understanding now their true purpose. The midnight tequila shot was a tribute to the lesser guardians that patrolled the boundary, keeping smaller predators at bay. The red dress woman must be given only water because liquid diluted her power. Alcohol would strengthen her ability to enthrall victims. The bathroom door led to a realm controlled by Chewy Hoak, who used the sound of crying children to lure compassionate souls into her clutches. The jukebox playing Ghost Riders signaled when the boundary was being tested by external forces. Closing the bar kept potential victims inside the relative safety of Kate's protected walls. Charlie's visits preceded deaths because he was assessing souls, determining who was already marked for collection. The burning sage indicated when native protections were being reinforced. Staying in the storeroom kept us from interfering with this beneficial process. And the lights must never go out completely, because darkness was the domain of Tza-Siwak, the shadow hunger that had claimed Mateo. 2 weeks before the solstice, an opportunity presented itself in the form of Randall Hicks, a wealthy developer from Phoenix who arrived in Tombstone with plans to purchase and modernize several historic properties, including land adjacent to Boot Hill Cemetery. Local opposition was immediate and fierce. Tombstone's economy depended on historical tourism, and Hicks's plans for a luxury resort complex threatened both the town's character and livelihood. But Hicks had political connections and seemed determined to push forward regardless of local sentiment. What truly caught my attention, however, was the way Charlie lingered near Hicks during his visit to Kate's. The developer ordered expensive whiskey, berated the server, and made crude comments about backward locals. All the while, Charlie sat in his corner, watching with what I now recognized as predatory interest. Hicks was already marked for collection. The question was whether I could use this to my advantage. I consulted Annie and Davis, outlining a dangerous plan. Annie listened gravely, fingering the medicine pouch at her neck. "You're playing with forces beyond your understanding," she warned. Elena Valdez tried something similar. It ended with half the town's children vanishing in a single night. "I've read her mistake," I argued. "She tried to substitute essence indefinitely. I'm proposing a hybrid approach. Essence from many. Blood from one who's already marked." Davis looked troubled. Even if Hicks is as corrupt as rumored, deliberately leading him to slaughter makes us no better than the things beyond the boundary. "I'm not suggesting murder," I clarified. "I'm suggesting a judgment ritual. We expose his sins publicly, generate the emotional essence through the town's collective response, and let Charlie determine if he's worthy of collection." "And if he isn't?" Annie asked softly. The question hung between us, heavy with implication. If Charlie judged Hicks unworthy of collection despite his misdeeds, the compact would still require blood, mine most likely, as keeper. Then I'll face that consequence, I said, with more confidence than I felt. We spent the next week in preparations. Annie crafted special protections, medicine pouches for key participants, sage bundles to mark the cardinal directions, a ceremonial drum made of stretched hide and cottonwood. Davis quietly investigated Hicks, uncovering evidence of bribery, tax fraud, and possible connections to organized crime in Phoenix. I studied the Book of Names obsessively, particularly Doc Holliday's entries about judgment rituals and Elena Valdez's notes on essence collection. The winter solstice would occur at precisely 9:17 p.m. on December 21st, just 1 week away. Everything was proceeding according to plan until I arrived at Kate's for my shift and found Lorna waiting with a grim expression. "There's been a development," she said, leading me to her office. On her desk lay a formal letter with the Arizona state seal. Hicks pulled strings. Historical preservation restrictions on downtown Tombstone have been temporarily suspended for economic development purposes. My blood ran cold. He can't just erase those protections. He just did. Construction begins December 22nd, the day after the solstice. She fixed me with a knowing look. The boundary markers are embedded in these buildings. If they're demolished, the compact breaks, I finished, and everything comes through. Not just the ones we know about, she warned. All of them. What's been held back for almost 150 years. I thought of Charlie's words to the woman in red. 3 months more until the solstice payment. Hicks wasn't just a convenient sacrifice. His development plans were an existential threat to the boundary itself. The winter solstice had just become about much more than maintaining the regular compact. The very survival of Tombstone was now at stake. That night, as I placed the midnight tequila shot, I noticed something different. The shot glass was already half empty when I set it down, as if something had taken partial payment in advance. When I turned back, Charlie was seated at his usual table, but he wasn't alone. Across from him sat the woman in red, both of them watching me with ancient, hungry eyes. The reckoning had begun early. 3 months have passed since the winter solstice. The snow that briefly dusted Tombstone has long since melted, and spring tourists flood Allen Street once more, blissfully ignorant of how close the town came to annihilation. The solstice night itself remains burned into my memory. The emergency town meeting at Kate's that drew nearly every resident, the public exposure of Hicks's corruption through evidence Davis had gathered, and the collective fury that generated waves of emotional essence almost visible in the air. I remember Hicks's face when he realized he'd been lured into a trap, not of ropes or chains, but of judgment. I remember Charlie rising from his corner table as the town's anger peaked, bone hands emerging from worn leather gloves as his human disguise melted away. And most vividly, I remember my own role. Standing before the altar in the basement, the Book of Names open as I recited the words of the compact renewal, offering both the collected essence and my own blood as keeper. The woman in red had smiled, accepting the essence that flowed from the gathered townsfolk above. The Ghani, the antlered hunger, had taken Hicks, who was indeed judged worthy of collection. And something else, something deeper in the earth beneath Tombstone, had accepted my blood offering and renewed the boundary for another year. Hicks was reported missing, his body never found. His development company withdrew their plans after evidence of his crimes was anonymously sent to state authorities. The historical preservation protections were reinstated. Tombstone survived, as it has for nearly 150 years, through a careful balance of sacrifice and vigilance. I still tanned bar at Big Nose Kate's. I still set out the tequila shot at midnight. I still keep the bathroom door locked when crime sounds emerge from within. But now I understand the weight of my role as keeper. The book of names rests in its compartment beneath the altar stone, updated with my account of the solstice ritual. My name remains on its list, open-ended, my term as keeper continuing until death or release. Charlie visits more frequently now, nodding to me with something approaching respect. The woman in red has appeared twice since the solstice, accepting her water without complaint, though her hungry eyes still follow certain customers as they leave. Annie has become my teacher, guiding me through her grandmother's knowledge of the boundary and its maintenance. Davis remains my ally in balancing human law with older justice, and Lorna watches it all with the quiet resignation of someone who has seen keepers come and go. Last week, I received a letter from Michelle, my ex-wife, wondering why I haven't replied to her messages since that strange night during the storm months ago. I haven't decided how to respond. My life in Phoenix feels like a fading dream compared to the harsh reality of my responsibilities here. Tonight, as I wipe down the bar and prepare for my shift, I notice a new customer walking through the door. Young, nervous, clearly running from something in his past. He reminds me of myself 6 months ago, when I first arrived in Tombstone seeking escape and found purpose instead. I pour him a drink and welcome him to Big Nose Kate's saloon, not mentioning the rules he doesn't yet need to know. As I serve other patrons, I catch Charlie watching the newcomer from his corner table, bone fingers hidden in gloves, eternally patient. Another lost soul has found his way to Tombstone. Whether he'll simply pass through or become part of the town's hidden history remains to be seen. But I'll be watching, as Mateo watched me, assessing, evaluating, perhaps even selecting. For I am the keeper now, and the boundary must be maintained. The hunger in the desert never sleeps, and the rules of Big Nose Kate's saloon must be followed, now and always.